nitrogen that's in natural gas to make anhydrous ammonia, which is then used to make other forms of nitrogen-containing fertilizer. The natural gas is cheap and is getting cheaper by the minute because of this process called fracking that you've heard about. Hydraulic fracking, where water is pushed into rock formations under high pressure to create cracks in the rock to release the natural gas so that we can use to feed our bad fossil fuel habit. So the fertilizer industry is destroying the environment. And burning fossil fuels also is creating a greenhouse gas problem. Phosphates are derived from some forms of phosphate fertilizers are from acid mining, which also pollutes the environment. And some forms of potassium-containing fertilizers are bad for the environment as well. Yet farmers rely upon them because they're cheap. But cheap isn't better for the overall sustainability of the planet. More earth-friendly ways to maintain enriched soil, in addition to those farming methods, no-till farming, include planting crops that don't require as much nitrogen to begin with. So oats and wheat use less nitrogen than corn. Use cover crops to, if you plant, instead of letting a land go fallow, meaning when it's not being used to let the wind erode it, you plant plants on it to keep the wind from eroding it, and also, depending on the type of cover crop you choose, you could be actually enriching the soil. And a lot of cover crops are capable of, we have a lot of nitrogen in our atmosphere, but the plants can't use it directly. We can't use it directly. Some plants have microbes that live within their roots that allow them to convert the nitrogen gas that's in the atmosphere into organic forms of nitrogen that they incorporate into their proteins of the plant. And then that type of nitrogen can be assimilated, can be used by organisms. And so alfalfa, peas, beans, clover, they're all nitrogen-fixing crops because they all have these bacteria that allow them to fix the nitrogen. And so when they're green, they're preventing the soil from being eroded. And then when they're dug back into the earth, they're adding that nitrogen, not as nitrogen gas, but now as organic nitrogen, that once the plant decomposes, that serves as fertilizer for new plants to grow, instead of using the nitrogen fertilizers that require fracking in our environment. Other sources of good fertilizer include compost and composted manure. And there are sources of phosphate and potassium that are more sustainable than the mined rock. Okay. So one solution is, the solution really is to go organic. And there's organic and then there's organic. To be certified organic, to be able to say, I am a USDA certified organic product, you have to get permission from the United States Department of Agriculture to call yourself that. And in order to so what they mean by organic is, organic agriculture is an ecological production system that promotes and enhances biodiversity, biological cycles, and soil biological activity based on minimal use of off-farm inputs and on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony. Well, so let's parse that. They agree in using cover crops, like I just spoke about. When the cover crop is green, it's preventing soil erosion. When it's dug into the ground, it's called a green manure. You can also use animal manures that are composted. And rotate crops so that you can rotate, say, a corn crop that requires a lot of nitrogen with a nitrogen-fixing crop that will enrich the soil so that the next time you grow the corn has enough nitrogen to grow, instead of just always growing the same thing all over and over. use methods of biological control and crop rotations to manage weeds, insects, and diseases. Do you know what that means? So instead of using chemical pesticides and chemical herbicides, use, say, insects that eat good insects that eat the bad insects, or plant plants that attract the good insects. Yes?
I went to Tanaka Farms a couple weeks ago, and they had like rows of strawberries, and in between the strawberries they planted these onions that, like, the onions kept the pests away so the strawberries could grow.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So it's called, it's integrated pest management. There's a term for that, but right now my brain is dead. So plants that attract the beneficial insects and that repel the harmful insects. Instead of monocropping, grow smaller amounts of larger numbers of different types of plants. And so and also, instead of growing all your corn in one, or all of any crop in just one row with nothing else, grow some of this crop here and something else here and something else here, so that if a disease does happen to attack one little patch of this crop, it won't just spread down the entire row. It has to, the closer, you go to when you have a large classroom filled with hundreds of students and somebody gets sick, they're more likely to get sick because you're in closed quarters. The same thing with the plants. If they're in closed quarters, they're more likely to get sick from each other. So you spread them apart and don't plant them all right next to each other so that, if a disease does happen to hit one part, it's not going to wipe out your entire crop. So try to use, instead of relying on off-farm inputs, use on-farm inputs, like the waste out of your cow's end. Renew your soil and water. Conserve your soil and water rather than using these other mechanisms that I just spoke about that deplete soil and water. Use organic fertilizers instead of synthetic fertilizers. In fact, organic practices specifically exclude the use of chemically, synthetically made fertilizers. You also cannot use sewage sludge. Sewage sludge. You go to the bathroom and the toilet, it ends up in your municipal processing plant that cleans up the waste. The waste that's left over is called sewage sludge. That ends up in bags of gardening soil that you buy at the garden center. If it says that it's organic but it has sewage sludge in it, it's not organic. It might have some ingredient in it that's organic, but it is not USDA certified organic because you cannot garden and get USDA organic approval if you use human waste in it, which is what sewage sludge is. You can't UV irradiate anything and call it organic, and you can't use genetically modified organisms or ingredients like I've already spoken about and call it organic. And small farms don't necessarily have to become certified, but they still have to follow all the rules. And following the rules means being organic before you call yourself organic for 3 years. You have to practice being organic for 3 years before you can say you're organic. You're not saying you're USDA organic, you're not allowed to do that if you don't get certification. But if you call yourself organic and you haven't been in operation for 3 years keeping records of your organic practices for 3 years, you're not organic, you're lying to the public. And animal products called organic must have been raised organically from the last third of gestation within the pregnant mama or upon hatching. And poultry, they have to have been in continuous organic practice from their second day of life. And dairy animals that produce milk have had to have been treated organically and fed only organic ingredients for at least a year prior to you harvesting their milk and selling it as organic. And this is just an oversimplification of the rules. The rules are pages and pages and pages. Organic doesn't necessarily mean animal-friendly. So, just because you buy eggs at a grocery store that say they're organic doesn't mean